General David Petraeus is regarded as a soldier and a scholar in equal measure. He led coalition forces in the Middle East in some of the most complex operating environments since Vietnam. He helped shape the US military's doctrinal approach to irregular warfare. He has a Princeton PhD. He is the current Kissinger Fellow at Yale University's Jackson School of Global Affairs. In the conversation that follows, we spoke about the conflict in Ukraine and whether or not that has resonance for what is currently going on in the Middle East. We spoke about whether or not China and the United States are on a collision course. All this from a figure who is considered to be one of the leading military intellects of his generation. General, it occurs to me that this year is the 50th anniversary of KKR. So it's quite an auspicious date for the organisation. You, of course, joined in 2013 to form your part of the organisation, which is firmly focused on geopolitics. It made me reflect on what was happening in 1976 for you. I think you had just completed your Ranger training and you'd just been assigned to the 509th Airborne Combat team. You're going to be stationed in Italy.
It's a real hardship tour, Vicenza, Italy.
Oh yes, yeah. The biggest challenge.
We'd jump all over Europe, and then when we were home, we'd go skiing in the Alps. So yeah,
sounds terrible, but
wonderful.
What I'm struck by is the extraordinary sweep of history for both KKR and for the heights that you were able to reach in your career, not only in military terms, but also in scholarly and academic terms. It would be really valuable to get a sense of the sort of conversations you're having with customers given this context.
Well, I often get asked, why did you go with KKR, of all things? Well, it's just an extraordinary firm. And the 50th anniversary was, in a way, validation of all that the firm has achieved. It's been a privilege to be part of the firm. There were a number of other opportunities, or a good, nice little competitive bidding war as I finally made the choice. But KKR was on the inside track. I knew Henry Kravis before. We'd actually had quite a relationship over my final, 5 or 7 years in government. And to be the chairman of the KKR Global Institute, to do something that I love doing, which is understanding the world. You mentioned that, I was not just a soldier, I was a bit of a scholar, and I still have had, 5 or 6 academic appointments over the years. I did a PhD at Princeton in a combination of economics and international relations, and I've taught both those subjects at multiple places. I'm the Kissinger Fellow at Yale right now, and I guide a graduate seminar, co-guide, somebody else does the work, on great power competition in the spring semester there, which is very intellectually, it's really about intellectual stimulation at this point. I mean, I'm at the point where just about all of my West Point classmates are not doing that much. There are a handful that are still quite active, but relatively few. And I do it because I enjoy it. It's very, very, again, intellectually stimulating. The travel is more than a bit crazy. I do 30 different countries a year, many of them more than one time, to get boots on the ground, understand in a very granular, detailed way what's going on in these countries. These are the countries in which we're most heavily invested, for example, or where there's something interesting going on, like Ukraine, and so on. But it's doable, and it's fun. I remember Henry Kissinger one time. He was quite a mentor of mine. We had quite a close relationship during, again, my 3 4-star and then CI director years, and ever after. And when I was the CI director one night, he hosted a dinner in my honor. My wife and all others were there, and it was in his personal apartment. And I gave him a CI medal ahead of time, which only the director can give, and not because he was spying for us, but because before every trip to Russia and to China, which he'd been doing for over half a century, or at the end, he would get briefed by us, and then when he came back, he would debrief us. And it was just very valuable. He was very upfront about it. He told the countries that he did it. He wrote a memo to the White House each time as well. And I decided to recognize that. And he was feeling good, and I noticed that he had more than the usual one glass of wine, and I was sitting next to him, and I asked him, Henry, what is it that worries you most personally? And he turned to me and he said, irrelevance. And there's a lot of that keeps a lot of us going. I think that there's it's rewarding to still be somewhat relevant. But again, it's very, very stimulating. The workforce is extraordinary. As I mentioned before we started, it's the highest quality. And that includes, again, the CIA, Special Mission Units, the 509th Airborne Battalion Combat Team, which is a wonderfully select elite unit. But, I've been privileged throughout my time in government, uniform, CIA, and now here, to have endeavors that are really meaningful. They're intellectually, again, exciting, stimulating, rewarding. And I, want to keep doing it as long as I can do it. I had a book as well, and on the speaking circuit, the highest form of white-collar crime in America, and all these other activities. And it's because they're enjoyable. I mean, we carve out whole weeks for the family throughout the course of a year. We have 5 grandkids now, and a lot of fun with them as well. But again, I do it because I enjoy doing it.
General, one way that you have maintained that relevance that you speak of is by consistently visiting the Middle East and the Ukraine. You have returned from there recently. I want to talk about Ukraine for a moment, because the way that the Ukrainian offensive has been so successful is quite fascinating.
It's extraordinary. It's a story of innovation.
Indeed.
And resilience. And, I actually gave a speech the last time. This is my 10th trip since the full-on invasion. I'm very proud to have been sanctioned by Putin very early on for my support of Ukraine. That's particularly sweet because he beat me out for Time Person of the Year in 2007. I was the runner-up to Vladimir Putin, quite a distinction. But what Ukraine is doing is just, it's almost breathtaking to see it and to have seen it from the very beginning when they stopped the Russian forces outside Kyiv and forced them to withdraw, held them in the other locations. Certainly they gave up more of their territory. But now in the recent months, they have actually been achieving greater, incremental to be sure, but greater gains on the battlefield than have the Russians. The innovation where they've gone from essentially combined arms warfare as we know it, armed tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, then it was an artillery battle, and now artillery can't even get in the fight because it's all unmanned systems of all different types. And if you look at it, for example, at sea, people forget about that particular theater of this war. The Ukrainians have actually sunk over 35% of the Russian Black Sea Fleet without a navy. They've done it with aerial drones that find the ships and maritime drones that sink them, all that they designed themselves. And the Russian Black Sea Fleet is now tied up in a port as far from Ukraine as it can get because it's not allowed to leave the Black Sea. There's a convention called the Montreux Convention from the 1930s that prohibits warships transiting out of or into the Black Sea. So they're stuck there. When you look at what's going on the front lines, you don't even have fighting positions anymore. You certainly don't have trenches because drones can fly through the trenches. Everything is unmanned. There's a death zone of about 35 kilometers in which you don't drive a vehicle. Commanders cannot visit their troops on the front, quote, lines, although they're not even in fighting positions anymore because the drone can fly in what you can shoot out of. So they're survivability positions, basically. They're just underground trying to survive with enough overhead cover in the form of ground above you. You burrow in from the side and excavate up and take it all out, and there's a little circular staircase. I've seen videos, never in person. But again, commanders can't go up in person either because it's too hazardous. So all of the resupply is done by remotely driven vehicles of various different types. They have supply vehicles, they have medical evacuation vehicles. You put the person on there, they have a capsule over top of it that protects the individual. They might have a drone fly over it on the way out, or aerial systems that bring up resupplies, batteries, ammunition, food, everything they need really has to be provided in that way. And they'll come out at night, get it, and then get back under cover before the enemy can react to them. I've watched actual engagements in drone operation centers where they see a Russian soldier, and if that soldier is not back into cover very, very quickly, it's over. It may take some time. They may have to use multiple surveillance drones because they only have 5-10 minutes on station because of battery life. That's what determines the death zone, because you launch them ideally outside the death zone, some inside, but they have to have very good cover and concealment and everything else. And then you just start to see the suicide drones begin to hit around the soldier, because they'll hit a tree limb, they'll hit the ear. Eventually they're going to finish it, and it's not going to end well for the Russian soldier. The Ukrainians, though, have been able to achieve incremental gains, again, greater than the Russians in each of the last 2 months, and it looks as if that's going to continue. They're now isolating the front lines by going after the logistical lines of communication of Russia. They're going to isolate Crimea. It's only 2 ways onto there. There's a Kerch Strait bridge for vehicles, that is, and then there's a road from the north into Ukraine, or into Crimea from Ukraine proper. And they're interdicting the travel on either of those. They've already sunk a lot of the ferries and other things that can do the maritime resupply. So there's massive gasoline lines on Crimea now. They were filmed by somebody on horseback the other day, which is so ironic. That actually is still working. And then they're going deep into the Russian Federation on a nightly basis. You know, they blew up I think it was a fuel storage location in St. Petersburg on the morning that Vladimir Putin welcomed the world back to the Davos in St. Petersburg, if you will, and then they hit him again the next day. They've hit at least 40% of the fuel storage and refineries. So Russia is not gaining as much from the lifting of oil sanctions because of worry about Brent crude prices as they otherwise would. And I can actually see a time, probably sometime next year, depending on how long the sanctions are lifted and a number of other factors, continued European support, if we can get more missile interceptors into them, is a critical. That's one shortcoming. They really don't have ballistic missile defense other than what has been provided to them, Patriots, and then there's this NASAM system that comes from Europe, and the interceptors for those. Well, they're incredibly good against Russian drones. They're knocking down 90-95% of those every night that come in from. So these are not the battlefield ones. These are the bigger, and quite good against cruise missiles with their F-16s and other aircraft. But the ballistic missile is a problem for them.
So that asynchronous nature of the conflict is what stands out in Ukraine, and it's
the innovativeness, really.
Right.
It's the sheer innovativeness and its sheer manufacturing scale. So the Ukrainians this year will manufacture 7 million drones. They've been using 10,000 per day. That's based on 3 million drones, 3.5 million last year. So they'll double production. And if they can double the number of remote pilots, then they can obviously use even more than that. But what's really coming is autonomy. And you're going to see actual autonomous unmanned systems in increasing numbers. The innovation, again, because of jamming. They have fiber optic cable that comes out the back of probably 60% of the drones that they use right now in the battlefield, obviously not the deep ones. But that cable now can go as much as 30, 35 kilometers. Everything just keeps improving at a very rapid pace. They're making software changes every week or two, hardware changes every 3 or 4 weeks. And again, just sheer capacity is stunning, because the future of war is all about massive numbers of attritable, cheap, unmanned systems, which in the course of the next year or two are going to become increasingly autonomous unmanned systems, and at some point are going to become autonomous systems of autonomous systems, where the sensors are autonomously collecting all kinds of information that's autonomously integrated into a common air picture that provides high fidelity, that the command and control autonomous system uses to make decisions and then issue orders autonomously to autonomous weapon systems or interdiction or drone intercept systems that then go out and perform their mission autonomously. That's coming soon to a theater near us, and we'll see it first probably in Ukraine.
Which is stunning in terms of the way that a country that is so, I suppose, outmatched like the Ukraine can keep at bay a country like
It's extraordinary.
Russia.
They're outnumbered 5 to 1 in terms of personnel, 12 to 1 in terms of the economy, and yet they are taking the fight to Russia on the front lines, on the Black Sea, in the depth of the battlefield and in the Russian Federation itself. And over time, Vladimir Putin's going to eventually look in the mirror and say, you know, I'm not only not going to achieve my immediate objectives of control of all the provinces that I've laid out, Donetsk, Luhansk, and others, I'm actually going backwards, and the casualties are so high that we can't sustain this. Again, they've taken more killed and wounded than the U.S. took in all of World War II.
So what I find interesting in what you've just described is that it's well within reach of the Iranians to deploy the same sort of methodology that the Ukrainians
They don't have the
deployed.
scale.
Right.
Actually, the Iranians gave the Shahed drones to Russia that Russia now uses against Ukraine. They actually re-engineered them. They have a faster speed, fly higher, bigger payload, and all the rest of that. The difference is that the Iranians are deploying small numbers of these, yet still causing major problems. And again, we have not learned sufficiently the lessons of Ukraine, none of us. Even the Western European countries, the countries to the west of Ukraine, haven't learned at the pace they should. True institutional learning begins with a complete overhaul of your concept of warfare, which now should be primarily unmanned systems, right now remotely piloted, but increasingly will be autonomous. And again, it's under the water, on the surface, in the air, on the ground, in space, in cyberspace, the equivalent, and even in the cognitive spaces. Then you have to change your organizational structures. So Ukraine has an Army, Navy, Air Force, and unmanned systems force, entirely new organization, which is inflicting over 90% of the casualties on the Russians on the battlefield on a daily basis.
Does this expose a risk, though, that the calculation made in relation to Iran falls short in that this conflict could be years before it gets resolved in a meaningful way?
No, I think that there will be an agreement on opening the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump desperately needs that. The Iranians know that. He's got midterm elections coming up. He's got to get back to the affordability agenda, get his declining approval rates going back up a bit if he can.
But that's a uniquely American perspective, the perspective from within Iran and arguably...
Well, and Iran has resilience.
Yes.
Iran is not facing midterm elections. These leaders don't even actually run the government or the economy. They're actually just running the country. In their hard line, arguably harder line than were those that they replaced. But their economy is gradually collapsing around them. They desperately need the frozen reserves. They desperately need to get travel into and out of their ports. Remember, we're blockading their blockade.
Yeah.
And so they need to resolve this as well.
So do you see this as having a tail that's relatively short, for example, as opposed to something that could drag on like the Ukrainian
Not necessarily.
experience? Right.
So I think first, it is possible, it depends what the agreement is, it's possible that Iran could emerge from this war quite significantly degraded militarily, but perhaps emboldened or even strengthened strategically, unless the agreement on the Strait ensures that there's no residual Iranian control or ability to toll or charge navigation fees, whatever it may be. But the other big implications have to do with what the Gulf states are going to do in response. And they're already doing it. Again, I'm also now chairman of KKR Middle East. And that's because we see that this region now as a destination for investment, not just a source of investment with us, which we have for decades. And the implications are very profound. They are going to spend much of what they normally might have invested outside in their countries in resilience, hardening, taking critical assets underground, redundancy, no single points or even double points of failure, defenses, especially against unmanned systems. And keep in mind, we've just seen small numbers here. We haven't even seen what Ukraine uses in a single day in the cumulative experience here. Probably not even approaches that. But there will be enormous new defenses, and there's also going to be, I think, retaliatory capabilities so that they can deter both by showing Iran they're not going to achieve what they did achieve this time with modest numbers, including, for example, knocking out 17% of the LNG capacity of Qatar for 3 to 5 years. but that they also can punish Iran in return if they actually go after them again. But beyond that, there's also going to be enormous expenditure on initiatives that enable them to bypass the Strait of Hormuz, so they're not as dependent on transit through the strait as they were before. And this is very significant, for example, for Qatar, which has no other way out for LNG. There are alternatives for crude oil.
Yep.
Saudi Arabia can send 7.5 million barrels to the port of Yanbu on Red Sea. The Emiratis can send 1.5 million barrels to the port of Fujairah in the Gulf of Oman. It's very close to the strait, so they may want to go a little further south over time, perhaps into Oman itself. But Qatar's got to figure out, how do you get this LNG out? And of course, that means you have to have liquefaction capacity at the port, so you can pipe it somewhere, perhaps, including Oman. But they have just a tiny fraction of the LNG capacity that you have, the liquefaction capacity that they have in their massive location in Qatar.
Substantial infrastructure.
Very, very substantial. And we're going to be part of it.
Yep.
We've done a lot of infrastructure deals in the Middle East. It's one reason, again, we have KKR Middle East, and I'm the chairman, is to show that how significant we attach to the opportunities there, again, as a destination, not just a source.
The renowned scholar Graham Allison wrote a seminal book.
Destined for War.
Indeed.
Without a question mark.
No, there was no question mark.
I've interviewed him. He's a mentor of mine. I was a fellow for him at the Belfer Center for 6 years at Harvard, non-resident, and interviewed him many times on Destined for War. Can the U.S. and China avoid the Thucydides trap, hearkening back to when you had an established power and a rising power, and inevitably they went to war. But of course, inevitably this can't be the case. We have to avoid the Thucydides trap. And frankly, I love the concept of this book and all the historical cases used, but none of those were in a nuclear age. And I think the situation today is just very different. I mean, these are the number 1 and 2 economies in the world. Both know that if what is termed severe competition, the description of the relationship between the U.S. and China right now, that was used by our previous National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, if severe competition ever evolves into true confrontation, not only do both countries lose, but the entire world loses. It blows up the global economy as we know it. And again, I think that's one of the factors that mitigates against a decision to reunify with force.
One of the things that was written about in that book is the extreme political will that is required to avoid that type of confrontation that you've just described. Do you think that political will exists presently to avoid that type of conflict? Well,
what we're talking about here is sustaining deterrence. And deterrence is a function of 2 elements. It's the potential adversary's assessment of your capabilities on the one hand. In this case, it's all of those involved here, including Australia, allies, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Philippines, and obviously Taiwan itself. And then the perception of your willingness to use those capabilities. And you have to make sure that both of these are rock solid. You can note, I think, accurately that President Trump calling the arms deal with Taiwan as a potential bargaining chip is not helpful here, but I don't think it was that egregious. And then, yes, we do need to transform our forces more rapidly in light of the lessons of Ukraine, but there's a lot going on there. Huge purchases of unmanned systems of all types. The U.S. military will buy about $55 billion of unmanned and autonomous systems just at a central level, much less what all the services are going to do. So you're going to see quite substantial change. I'd like to see it be faster, even more transformative, and truly institutional in each of the military services. Because keep in mind that the way the money flows in the United States government for defense is it goes directly to the Department of the Army, Navy. It actually goes, there's a sleeve for the Marine Corps and the Navy, there's the Air Force and now the Space Force, and then a bit to the special ops and cyber communities as well. But the big money is to the services, and they're the ones that have to transform. We did that transformation, as I mentioned, during the counterinsurgency era. but it's nothing like what is required now. And frankly, the other service is that Marine Corps did it with us. Jim Mattis and I were partners when we did the field manual on counterinsurgency and a lot of the other changes. But the Air Force and Navy, I think rightly, did not change as much. But this is much more sweeping change required, shorter period of time, and truly very, very profound. I mean, you're talking about replacing tank brigades with unmanned services units of various types.
General, it occurs to me that so many of the geopolitical elements that we're navigating today were born over 100 years ago in the form of an assassin's bullet finding its mark in Sarajevo, the Balfour Declaration, the Sykes-Picot cartography that has had such a profound impact on the Middle East, the reparations that were forced on the Germans in the Treaty of Versailles. How conscious are you of those events, those influences, and what we might be doing today to see similar circumstances play out over the course of the next century?
They're the legacy that actually shaped a lot of the dimensions of the challenges that you have. Again, Sykes and Picot just sort of drawing oblivious to the tribes or the other entities organizing elements of the Middle East as example, and leaving challenges, literally drawn in various borders and so on. But that's, true throughout history. There's always this historical legacy that can actually lead to future confrontation, future conflict, and so forth. And we have some of that now. I mean, we've obviously exited the period of the U.S. unipolar moment. In fact, during the time I've been at KKR, we've evolved from what could be termed an era of benign globalization, in which economics largely drove geopolitics. All the barriers to trade, investment, capital flows, and so forth were being reduced, and globalization as measured by global trade was going like this. And by the way, supply chains were so secure that you could do just-in-time logistics. Over a decade later, we're in an era where geopolitics now drives economics. It's an era of renewed great power rivalries. The holiday from history is over. Just-in-time logistics is given way to just-in-case logistics because supply chains aren't as reliable and dependable, and all the barriers that were going down are going up, and globalization has become slowbalization, and within it, regionalization. That's ongoing. That's a reality. As a CI director, you learn very early on a very salutary lesson, and that is to deal with the world the way it is, not the way you'd like it to be. And, in fact, inclinations of American leaders to either lead the world or not lead the world as much have an effect as well. The desire for America first, although it's not America alone. But again, all of these have an impact. And you can see, again, challenges at the very least to the so-called rules-based international order established by, again, the victors of World War II by and large, and sustained by them ever since. And there are cracks and so forth in that. And I would argue that if you look at the world from a U.S. perspective with our allies and partners together, that we are the guys in the circus keeping a lot of plates spinning. Those plates represent wars, issues, challenges, threats that you have to address from a U.S. and Western perspective. And there's more plates in that tent than at any time since the end of the Cold War, if not World War II. And the China-U.S. or China-Western plate representing that relationship is bigger than all the other plates in the tent. But our allies and partners are engaged in this as well. We're all keeping these plates spinning together. And there is a huge recognition in the United States, even if not always in the executive branch, of the importance of NATO, the U.S. Alliance with Australia, New Zealand, Japan, all of these around the world. And by the way, as we think about that, let's not forget that we recently celebrated, a few years ago, 100 years of mateship between Americans and diggers, and that I'm the only person alive today, I believe, who commanded Australian forces in 2 different wars, as part of the coalitions, of course, and that we had enormous respect and admiration and kinship, again, for those who wore the Australian uniform in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we still do. It's an incredible partnership. Mateship is a wonderful term, and it does capture that relationship. Australia punched so far above its weight class that it wasn't funny. In fact, it was an Australian prime minister who led, when I was commanding in Afghanistan, the renewal of the mandate that we had. The U.S. president at the time didn't want to be the one who led it initially, and actually the Australian prime minister stepped forward and did that. So there's an incredible shared history here, and frankly, there's a shared destiny as well. And it's one of the reasons I'm here. Obviously, it's one of the reasons why I've long treasured the relationship with Australia, frankly, why I'm proud to wear the Order of Australia in my lapel as well.
General, it's been a pleasure speaking to you today.
Good to be with you, Tom. Thank you.